This meeting is being recorded.
There we go. Okay, cool. Got it. So this meeting is being recorded. Please identify yourself when talking so we can capture accurate minutes. For the chat function, as a board required to follow Open Public Meeting Act regulations, we can't conduct board business in the chat. If you do put anything in the chat, we'll read it out loud for everyone to hear. There's closed captioning available if you click this symbol shown on the screen. And you can turn on WebEx Assistant and follow the prompts, turn on the closed captioning. If you want to lock participant videos in WebEx, you can do that to see who's speaking and customize your own set of pins. And this shows how to do that. All right, so first, we're going to start with an overview of what a request for application is, what funds are available, and what programs are being solicited. So first of all, there are two main application types. The first is the Community Action Program. The acronym for this is CAAB or CAAB. You may see that acronym throughout this presentation or throughout the scoring process. So that is what that stands for. This funding comes from both the federal and state government. The funding is called the Community Services Block Grant, or CSBG. Probably seen that as CAAB members. This is the funding that actually requires that we have a Community Action Advisory Board. And the intention of the funding is to support anti-poverty programs that help eliminate the causes and conditions of poverty and help people reach self-sufficiency. So this RFA is funding categories and services that were, first of all, the most frequently identified in the 2024 Community Needs Assessment, and second of all, for which there are no or inadequate sources of funding in the community. And we'll get into more detail in a few slides about what specifically was being solicited for this request for application. The second application type that was solicited is the Homeless Crisis Response System, or HCRS funding. So this funding comes from a lot of different areas and supports programs that provide services for people who are experiencing homelessness or are at risk of becoming homeless. This is funded by multiple different funding sources, but a few of the main ones are the local homeless document recording fees and the system demonstration grant. And this request for application is funding programs that directly support the goals outlined in, first of all, the Clark County Homeless Action Plan, which we'll also talk about more later, and secondly, the State of Washington Homeless Housing Strategic Plan. And something that's really important to note about these two application types is these were two separate requests for applications. So when you go to score applications, some of you will be scoring applications in both of these categories. And in the procurement portal and the procurement system, these are two separate RFAs. And there's multiple application types within each request for application, but if you're reviewing Community Action Program applications, they're going to be in one category, and the Homeless Crisis Response System are in an entirely separate category or application portal. So we'll go into more in detail later. All right, so getting into some details about the Community Action Program funding that is available. So for this request for application, we have approximately $284,000 available per fiscal year. Like I said, the program types that are being funded are based on the priority needs identified in the Community Needs Assessment. So some of the programs that are being funded include physical health, which includes dental services and food assistance. These were the top needs identified in the Community Needs Assessment. We're also funding income and asset building services. So this could include credit repair, financial planning, and budgeting assistance for those types of services. And then we're also funding support services for transportation specific assistance. And the funds available in each category were determined based on the proportions of people who identified these as high needs in the community needs assessment. So we really tried to divide funding really based on the needs that we were seeing in the community. So there are $113,500 available per year for these physical health services, $99,500 a year available for income and asset building services, and $71,000 per year for transportation assistance. There were a few other funding categories or a few other service categories that were identified as high needs in the CNA and are being funded outside of the Community Action Program application. These include housing assistance. All housing assistance services are being funded through the Homeless Crisis Response System, RFA, which we'll talk about more. Kayla will get into a lot of detail about that. Legal assistance, as well as information and referral services, are funded through the Community Action Program, but these funds were awarded as sole source contracts. So this means that the organizations that receive funds don't have any competition in our community for other agencies that would be applying for those funds. So they were automatically awarded funding without having to go through the request for application process. And this includes Clark County Volunteer Lawyers Program receives funding for legal assistance, and 211 Info receives funding for information and referral services. And importantly, the minimum request for these funds was $40,000 per year. This is because at the county, to manage contracts, it takes a lot of time and staff and administrative overhead. So if we were to award contracts for under $40,000 per year, we would have to take so much of that as the county to just manage the grant from our side. So it doesn't make sense to award contracts under that amount. And also importantly, the funding can be moved between these categories. If, for example, you all decided not to recommend applications for funding that were solicited under, say, one of these categories, and so we could move those funds to another category.
Maddie, you have a question?
Yeah, I see Faye has her hand raised. Go ahead, Faye. Faye, you are muted.
I didn't ask a question.
Oh, your hand is raised.
Wow, that's my interesting new program thingy. Never mind, sorry. I can't,
Okay.
but I can raise my hand. Okay.
No worries, Faye. All right, does anyone else have any other questions about this before we move on? All right, moving forward then, let's talk about the available funding for the Homeless Crisis Response System request for application. So in this RFA, there are approximately $4 million available per fiscal year. The program types include rapid rehousing or RRH. There are $540,000 available per year in this category. There's permanent supportive housing or PSH, and there are $886,106 per year available in this category. And we'll go into more detail about what these categories really mean and what the requirements are for programs submitting applications in these categories. There's also street outreach, homelessness prevention, or EPRAP, which stands for Eviction Prevention Rental Assistance Program. There's temporary housing interventions, that includes emergency shelter and transitional housing, and then core supports.
And can I add?
Yes.
For services that we don't solicit but that are automatically awarded, those are emergency shelter services that are already existing. So any emergency shelters funded by the county do not have to go through a competitive procurement process, so they are not included in this RFA. and then any community supports, and that would be the work that Council for the Homeless does for our HAP, our Homeless Action Plan, community planning, and any system-wide supports that we require them to do.
Thanks, Kayla. Anything else you want to mention about homeless crisis response system?
Don't change it yet, please.
Sorry, there was a request to go back to that slide. And Amy, just so you and everyone knows, I'll send these slides out to you all, and this is being recorded, so you all can go back and look at these if you have any further questions. All right, so just to give you all some more context about these different types of funding, we do currently fund a lot of programs under these funding sources. So some of the examples of programs that we currently fund under the Community Action Program include 211 Info, which is an information and referral program. Battleground Healthcare provides a dental service program. Clark County Volunteer Lawyers, which I mentioned, has a legal aid program. The Lord's Gym and Share both have food assistance programs, all currently funded. Some of these agencies came back to request funding again for this next round of contracts and allocations. So you'll see those if you're reviewing applications in these categories. And then under the homeless crisis response system, we fund, the same categories that are being solicited for funds, including rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, street outreach, prevention, transitional housing, and SOAR. What does SOAR stand for again?
SSI/SSDI, Outreach, Access, and Recovery.
Okay. All right, so for some information about the timeline and review process. So applications open back in October 1st of 2024. We had agencies submit pre-applications by November 1st, 2024. The pre-applications were a really broad overview of, what funding type they were going to be soliciting, the amount that they were asking for, and some information about the agencies, like if they have any pending legal actions or if they have experience with these type of funding sources. And that was really to give us a chance to make sure that they would be eligible for funding before they took the time to proceed with the full application. And then full applications were due on January 3rd. Staff are currently working to review these and ask for any technical corrections. Technical corrections include things that wouldn't, improve someone's application, but are like, say, if there's a signature missing on a form or that type of stuff that's required to complete the application, but wouldn't, necessarily change the substance. Yeah, exactly, change the substance and, provide favor to any one agency over another. And then once these technical corrections are complete, applications will be open to the CAAB for your application review. So you all will be getting your applications to score likely in February, and you'll have a few months to review and score applications. Scores will be due on April 25th, 2025, and we'll remind you of that due date a lot of times. And as part of the application process, all applicants have an opportunity to present on their programs to the Community Action Advisory Board. So these presentations will be happening on March 5th and April 2nd, 2025. This will be during our regular meeting times. It'll be held in this room and online. Each applicant will have 5 minutes to present on their proposed program, and then the CAAB will have 5 minutes to ask any questions. And so we have a lot of applications this year. I told you all this in our meeting last week, but we've received 36 applications, so that means that these meetings will have to be quite long. Both the meetings on March 5th and April 2nd are scheduled from 9 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. to make time for all of those presentations. And then, like I said, application scores will be due April 25th. The CAAB will have a conversation and make recommendations for funding during our board meeting on May 7th. and then we'll provide those recommendations to the Clark County Council for approval. The council will be reviewing and approving proposed contracts during their meeting on May 27th. We'll be doing contract negotiations in June, and then contracts will start July 1st, 2025. And the contract period is July 1st, 2025 through June 30th, 2027. That's a 2-year contract period, and then there is an option for a 3rd year for each of these programs to renew and extend that funding.
I have 2 questions.
Looks like Faye's hand is raised again.
Yes, 2 questions. One is approximately how many applications will each of us get? And the second is just a comment. There's a whole lot of difference in income, et cetera, from October to April. So how is that handled?
So to answer your first question, each CAAB member will be scoring 12 applications. We will get into which applications each of you will be scoring in a little bit. And for your second question, I am not sure I 100% understand the question. Are you saying that agencies? Can you repeat the question, actually?
The financial situations change a great deal in 6 months. Everything changes a great deal in 6 months. So what they were applying for in October may not be their same conditions in April. Do you comment that?
So Faye, hi, I'm Kayla Williams. I don't think we've had a chance to meet yet. I'm the program coordinator for our homeless crisis response system. This is state for us and for Abby. There's a designated pool of funds that is subject to change, and it could change. It actually already has changed for the homeless system. We originally, when we published the RFA, had about 20% more in funds, but the state has alerted us that we need to prepare for cuts post, the lessening of funds coming into the community after COVID. So this is not an amount that we designate at our level. It's an amount that is determined for us by an outside source, and we are soliciting contracts with individual agencies. So these aren't for individual people amounts of money that they're applying for or anything like that. It is for agencies who would like to administer these different kinds of services and have existing budgets and existing history for how much they need to be able to give that service in a community.
Yeah, and just to add to that, this is a pretty standard timeline for these type of, requests for application and grant proposals and awards. So this is something that nonprofits are used to in terms of projecting what type of funding they will need for the next year to manage their programs. Does that answer your question, Faye?
Yes, 99%. So we will be reviewing the applications for the agencies.
Yes, correct.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, so agencies will have submitted applications for proposed programs, and they'll use these programs to serve individuals in the community. The determination of how individuals receive services will be determined throughout the duration of the program. What we're deciding is which programs that the county is going to fund with these funding categories.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course.
Abby,
Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
is May 7th our regular CAB meeting?
Yes, May 7th is the regular meeting. All right, any other questions? All right.
I have a question.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I think I have a feeling you might answer this, but I want to ask it just in case. Are you going to be talking about how the presentations connect with the scoring? And because I noticed that the presentations are kind of overlapping with how we would be scoring. Does information that we get from the presentation, are we allowed to incorporate that into the scoring? Or how do those two interact?
That's a really good question, Brittany. So what I would probably recommend is at least reading through your applications before you hear the presentation so that you have a good sense of, what the presentation is about. Each presentation is only 5 minutes, so it's going to be a really broad overview of the program proposal, and it's really a chance for you all to ask clarifying questions about the program. Likely it won't really impact your scores because the scores are based on the written application, but if you have any, clarifying questions about the program design or the program purpose, that is a really good chance to, clarify what you see in the application. So the steps that I would recommend is reviewing your application, but not scoring it, and then hearing the program proposal, and then hearing the program proposal presentation, and then after the presentation, entering your scores based on the application and whatever clarification and follow-up questions you are able to receive. Does that make sense?
Yes. And then are we only allowed to ask questions to organizations that we're scoring, like in the presentation?
I think you're welcome to ask questions to any of the agencies that are providing presentations. And also, if anyone on the CAAB wants to score more applications than you were assigned, you're welcome to do that. We average the scores, so the more reviewers we have, the better for each application. We just didn't want to overwhelm you all too much with the applications because each one does take probably 45 minutes to an hour to score. So 12 per person is already a lot of time for you all. But if anyone is like, hey, I really wanted to score this application category too, as long as you don't have a conflict of interest, you're welcome to do that.
And I do just want to add one thing. The presentations really should be an opportunity once you've reviewed your application for the programs that you are reviewing for, which will be by program type. We'll get into that later. I would recommend coming in with a set of, if you have areas of clarification, but the agencies are going to be very tight in that window of time that they're going to have to make sure that we can get through everyone. So we're not going to be able to have a lot of time allotted for like back and forth dialogue or diving into the program. And then as we'll get into the request for application funding guides later, there is very specific criteria and guidelines for scoring. And for the system, there's a reason why there's guidance. Some scores or some items are worth more due to grant requirements for components that need to be in there. So it is pretty clear how scoring needs to occur. And the application presentations are really just a supplement to get you more familiar in a broad sense with what the agencies are delivering.
I have another question, unless someone else had their hand raised.
I don't see any other hands. Go ahead, Brittany.
Okay. The program presentation, is that something that the state requires us to have, or is that something that the county decided to put as part of the process?
It's county decided. It's not a requirement for us. No.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure if you heard what Kayla just said, but it's not a state requirement of the funding. It's just something that the county added as part of the application process to give all the applicants a chance to share additional information and give scorers a chance to ask those follow-up questions.
Okay. I'm curious if after the March and April meetings, if in our meeting after that, so then I guess would it be May that we would have another meeting, or would that be our equity meeting?
So that's a good question. So we would have an equity meeting in April, but because we have to have a chance for everyone to provide their program presentations, we're doing the program presentations instead of the equity training in April. So we'll have, moving for the next few months, we'll have equity training in February, program presentations March and April. That will be instead of our regular board meeting and instead of our equity training. And then we'll be back to our regular board meetings in May. And in May is when we'll be discussing the scores and finalizing those recommendations for funding.
Okay. I guess what my question is if we can create time after this process is done to talk about how the process was and how we felt about the presentations, because I want to be clear that right now, first of all, I want to be very transparent why WCA applies for these funds. However, I don't participate in the application and I don't present. But it feels right now that the presentation is a little bit more performative than actually allowing time to get information and to ask substantial questions. And so I would request that we put time on the agenda after this process is done to have a conversation about the process and if the presentations are actually really honoring time or if we're asking the organizations to perform for us.
Yeah, that's a really good idea, Brittany, and I'm happy to add that to a future CAAB meeting to reflect on, how the process went for everyone and how it can be improved moving forward.
Thank you.
I see Melanie's hand.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I'm just a little bit late to the meeting, so I might be asking questions that don't make sense, but I was just wondering about the timeline for the application review versus the program presentations, and those are supposed to inform our scoring and review process, having the April 2nd one so late that some of us may, based on our time and schedule, have already tried to go through and score a bulk of what, because I think I heard we each have 12 to score. So, I mean, that's going to take a substantial amount of time. And knowing that the scores are due April 25th doesn't really leave a lot of time after April 2nd to use that information collected from the presentations to inform our scoring if we've already had to do a bulk of the scoring before that.
Yeah, for sure. So, Melanie, we actually did just talk about this with Brittany, but I'm happy to reiterate it. So, my recommendation will be giving you all your applications probably early February. My recommendation is to review all of your applications before the program presentations. You can hold off on your scores if you want, but review them, make any notes, maybe have your potential scores laid out. And come up with any follow-up questions that you may have for agencies. Then during the presentations in March and April, you can get that additional clarification, ask any follow-up questions, and then between April 2nd and April 25th, you can finalize and enter your scores. Does that make sense?
Yes, and sorry to make you repeat that.
No,
Thank you for answering my question.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a good repetition. I needed it too.
Yeah.
During those meetings with the presentations, you're scheduling 5 minutes for the presenters.
Mm-hmm.
And then how much time for questions?
5 minutes for questions as well.
Okay, so 10 minutes, 36 presenters, 360 minutes. No wonder the meetings are going long.
Yeah, exactly. And it is, I wish we had more time for each agency, like Brittany said, to really, have time for in-depth conversations about each program. But we know we are already asking a lot of you all to commit this extra time. It's already, like 7 hours of meeting time to do these program presentations. So I think it is a really good idea to, after this process, have a conversation about, how that went. Is it worth extending them? Does the CAAB want to spend more time on program presentations? Is it worth removing them? So yeah, we can definitely, after the process is over, have a conversation about how we want to do this next time.
That really underscores the purpose then, this cycle of reviewing those applications and having the questions prepared so that we don't waste one another's time with developing questions.
Additionally, what I would recommend too is making sure that, because Abby's got the timeline already ready. I'm not sure if you've shared it yet for presentations for our agencies. And we know who's presenting on what programs. And so we can get that information to you for who's presenting in March who's presenting in April. That way, if you're scoring one of the program types that's presenting in March, you know that you can get some questions ready to go before that March 5th deadline. Really, the presentations are meant to be supplemental. It's meant to be, if you're going through their application scoring and you're not quite sure of a certain program component, or you think they might be missing a requirement, that is where that time comes in for questions. And the agency is there to be able to speak on those questions themselves. You also have the option, if you would like to, contact Abby and I if you have specific questions for the agency, and we could give the agencies some of these questions ahead of time as well to give them additional time to prepare for what they might be asked. So we have some options to how we can approach the presentations, but for the most part, the presentations in themselves should not be dictating your scoring in any way. They should be providing additional information if you have questions from their applications.
Is it possible to return to the scoring and then modify something
Yes.
after the presentations?
Yes.
All right, really good questions, everyone. Any other questions on the timeline at this point? Okay, moving forward. So I'm going to be mentioning this a lot throughout the presentation, but we have these two really important resources that you all should be referencing in depth throughout your scoring process, and they are guidance documents. There's one for the Community Action Program and one for the Homeless Crisis Response System. These can be found in a couple of places, and I will pull those up to show you. So first of all, you can find them on our website. So I'm just gonna show this. Can you see that on the screen, Kayla? Okay, awesome. So on the Clark County Community Services page, under Community Action and HCRS, there's this tab, Application for Funds. This is the application website that we sent all of the applicants. They received all of this information before they even started applying for funds. So you'll be using the same information that applicants received to score. And so under application types, we have the Community Action Program, we have the Homeless Crisis Response System, and there's a link to the application and funding guide under each. So if you just click here, you can pull up the funding guide. And each one outlines a description of the funding, the areas of need that are being supported, the funding categories that we already talked about, some fund use restrictions, the RFA process that applicants went through, some program requirements, contract period, the timeline that we've talked about. This was some technical assistance that we offered this fall, programmatic requirements. They'll have submitted a lot of these documents with the application. And then importantly, this is going to be the most important part for you all. So in this application overview section, there is detailed information about every single question in the application and how it will be scored. So first there's this pre-application. You all aren't scoring the pre-application. This was pass or fail, but if you're curious about the questions, those are here. And then under the full application questionnaire section, you'll see all of the programs that were asked, or all of the questions that were asked, a description of the question, the points awarded, and how it will be scored. So we'll get into this in more detail later. I'm going to go through all of these with you and talk about the scoring expectations for each question and what agencies were told. But if you want to reference this again, I'll send out the PowerPoint, and it's all in this guidance document. There's another one that looks really similar for the Homeless Crisis Response System application. This was updated in December, and Kayla can talk about that a bit. This is because we received a notification from the state that funding was actually going to be reduced after we had already notified applicants of how much funding was available. So that had to be revised. So again, it talks about the RFA process, the overview, the funding, and then down at the bottom, you have all the information about all the questions and how to score them. And it's a bit more complicated for the homeless crisis response system because there are a lot of different funding types. And so questions may vary between funding types, but Kayla is going to get into all of that detail later.
Okay, you have something to add there. So also with these were also provided to the agencies, so you can download them directly from Bonfire with all the other agency files. The agencies were required to submit the last page of the document, at least for the homeless system. I'm not sure for yours too, confirming that they read through it. So this is the full process that the agencies were required to read through and follow completely to submit their applications. And they have all the same information that you will have in here.
Yeah, thanks Kayla for adding that. So back to the PowerPoint. So like I said, these can be found on the application webpage. I also emailed them out to you all. I have hard copies here in the room for people who are here, and it can be found on Bonfire, which is the application portal. And we'll go into more detail about where exactly to find that in Bonfire when we get to that section, which is next actually. Yeah, go ahead.
Somebody that's done this a few times, familiar with it, it would probably be good to get a hard copy or print one out at home or ask you to mail one or something, because to refer back to, especially if it is one of your first times, is to refer back to this as you're reading them to helps.
I will say too, for the homeless system, because it is very complex, when you're in here, you may notice that there's the same question over and over and over, and it's designated differently based on program type.
I was thinking, are these like, is this like kind of a help?
Yeah, it's a help for scoring. And so because of how complex it is in here for you guys, you will be receiving from me an email if you're a part of one of my scoring groups with a specific version of this in PowerPoint, just of your program question. That way it's not so convoluted.
I just remember the very first time I did it, I kept having to go back and check and see if I had a hard copy of nothing to look, so I kept having to do the computer backward. And so having that to refer to you learn all of the, and you already know all this stuff in here.
For sure, yeah, and I mean, Abby will see you guys, she's every month, and we have copies printed here. So if you ever want to swing by, we have the copies in the office, and we can make sure one of us are here. Or I'm sure we can swing by wherever you are, if that's easier for us to go out to you guys. But yeah, we have printed copies of the guidance documents if you would like them.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if everyone online can hear Amy. She's a bit far from the mic, but she was just saying that having a printed version of the guidance documents is really, really helpful because you're going to be going back and forth between the application and the guidance document a lot. So if you can't print out a copy at home, let me know and I can get one for you, mail it to you, whatever works best. All right, any questions on guidance documents? All right, so now I just have a little knowledge check. I'll just go through each one, and if you think you know the answer, you can just raise your hand or shout it out. So the first question is, what are the two types of applications that will be reviewed?
Homeless crisis.
CAAB and homeless crisis response. Oh, sorry.
Yes, correct, Melanie and Rob. That is the Community Action Program, or CAAB, and Homeless Crisis Response System, or HCRS. All right, when are application scores due?
April something?
Yep, April 25th.
Wait, what was it?
April 25th,
25th,
2025.
okay.
And where can you find the guidance documents for application review and scoring? There's 3 locations.
County website, Bonfire.
Yep,
I don't remember the third one.
and email. I emailed them out to you all.
Okay.
And I'll send another email with them as well when I follow up about this meeting. All right, before we get to the next section, are there any questions on that RFA overview? Okay, so next we're going to talk a bit about Bonfire. and the actual logistics of the application scoring process. So Bonfire is a procurement software platform that we use to solicit and score applications. This is where all applicants submitted their applications and where you all will find them and do all of your scoring. So, and as a reminder, there is a separate application portal for the Community Action Program and Homeless Crisis Response System applications. So to get us started, we're going to watch a 5-minute video about scoring in Bonfire. What site can't be reached? Okay, seems like I'm having some internet issues potentially. Give me 1 second, everyone.
I'm just wondering, because I have been on there in like a year or more. Have they changed things on Bonfire? What?
They update them, but no, pretty minor.
Sorry, thanks for your patience, everyone. All right, so when you click this link, which I'll send out over email as well, it takes you to this page about evaluating a project in Bonfire. It has some information and it has an instructional video, which hopefully we can play. Hopefully we can hear.
The Wi-Fi is really kind of
Yeah, and not the Wi-Fi.
It's too bad there's no stream though, so.
So we are going to walk through it too.
Yeah.
And the link is here.
As an evaluator, you will have received an email that you've been invited to take part in a project. Some criteria has been released for your review. So we're going to start at the login page.
Real quick, can everyone online hear the sound?
It's a little muffled.
It's muffled, yeah.
Okay.
7 minutes.
We might need to.
Yeah, I think instead of this video, unless I can get it to the speaker.
Very good, it'll be a sound effect.
Okay, we're gonna try one more time, and if this doesn't work, then I'll just have you guys watch this on your own.
And this is where you can type in your email and your password.
Bye. You're online. Is that any better online?
No.
No? Okay, then I will just have you guys watch this on your own. I'll send out the link over. But this will take you through the steps you need to score an application.
So once you've done that, go ahead and click login.
Okay. All right. All right, so instead of the video, I'm just gonna pull up what Bonfire looks like. This will take you, the video will take you through, you know, all of the steps that you need to log in and get your account set up and do the scoring and everything. But I'll just show you what it looks like so that you all can see it. All right. So when you log into Bonfire, there will be this projects page. I have a lot of them, but you guys will just have the Homeless Crisis Response System and the Community Action Program.
And they'll be under evaluating for them.
Okay, and Kayla says they will be under evaluating for you guys instead of active. So if you go from active to evaluating, I'm only an evaluator for the Community Action Program, RFA, but you'll have both if you're scoring applications in both categories. Some of you will only be scoring applications in the Homeless Crisis Response System category, depending on the application groups. All right, so if you click on your project, it's gonna look something like this. And so the first thing that I'd recommend doing is going to this Files tab. This shows all of the files that were shared with agencies, and is really going to be an important resource to get you all oriented. And I think, hold on, let's move back to.
Can you enlarge the screen?
Enlarge the screen. Yes, is that better?
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
It will look a little different on their end.
Okay.
Because we have some higher up accessibility.
Okay, yeah, Caleb says this will look a little bit different on your end because we have different views as RFA designers and you all are evaluators, but it should still be labeled as public files with all of the files that were shared with applicants and that you're able to review. So the ones that I would recommend reviewing for this application, which again, I'll review later, are these best and emerging practices, which kind of define best practices. The applicants were asked about these in the application in terms of which ones that they'll be using. So it'll be a good idea for you all to review these definitions. And then the guidance form, obviously, we already talked about that. Some of these were just forms that they all needed to sign for the application, so aren't super important for you. I would review this definitions for community action programs. It talks about a lot of the definitions that are used in the application, so that will be super helpful. And maybe these, I think those are the main ones that you'll want to look at. Oh, and the community needs assessment, if you haven't already reviewed that, because that is what was used to define which funding categories are being awarded. All right, and then if you scroll down to submissions, this is where all of the applications that you'll be scoring will be listed. And so for me, I can see all of the applications that were submitted under the Community Action Program. For you, you'll just be able to see the ones that you specifically are scoring. And I like to zoom out a little bit to see it all. But if you go here to open and scroll down to the document you want to see. So you'll see here all of the documents that were submitted by each agency. The conflict of interest and anti-lobbying form, E-Verify, MOU, these were all just documents that they needed to sign to comply with, funding requirements. You may not need to review these yet, Caleb.
I was going to say, I have a question for the collective, because what we did was put these admin documents, which really are just items that we need to make sure the agencies on our end are, they meet their 501c3. They are nonprofit organizations. They have fiscal capacity. So really just admin documents. We put them here so you can see them. However, there is a lot of extra documents that you might not need to actually score because in previous RFAs, CAAB members have wanted access to all of them. If you would like us to keep them in here, we can, but we also have the option of removing them and only keeping the documents in your view that are necessary to RFA scoring, if that's simpler for the group at large.
Maybe some guidance about how to, about which documents are the most important to read.
Yes, and we do have that in the presentation at a later slide too.
Yeah, for sure.
But having this as part of the public record, we were shown the documents. That appeals to me.
Okay, for sure. Yeah, so you do have access to these. For these documents, you probably don't need to review them, but if you want to, you're welcome to. The most important document for you all to review is down at the bottom, and it's the full application questionnaire. So if you click on that, it will pull up. So in this category, it'll pull up all of the applications in this category. And you'll see the question. So the first question here is describe the proposed program in detail, and you'll see everyone's response to that question. And then down at the bottom, if you are scoring this question, you'll have a little score. So for me, I'm only scoring a few of the questions that are being scored objectively. I'll talk about what that means more in detail. So I'll scroll down to one of the objective question.
Do your down to
there. Okay, there we go. So you'll see a little score and it'll say, you know, what the question is being scored out of. You'll enter that there. And so what I would recommend doing before you enter these scores is actually downloading the application so that you can, you know, make notes and decide what scores you want to use before you enter them in here. And so how you do that is go over to Actions and you say download all files, and that will download the report. When you download it, the questionnaire will be pulled up in an Excel file, and I can show you all what that looks like, though since the internet's being slow, it may not download.
save a lot of time, because I push on each question and then you scroll down the question.
Yeah, and I will say the Excels, they don't show the full questions either.
Okay.
Yeah, so you do have to open in each one. And then the nice thing about the bonfire system is they will put like, say you're scoring EPRAP or CAP, then you'll see all of the agency's answers kind of like side by side, so you don't have to flip through each individual application.
And that feels time to know that if you push the arrows, that it will take you to the next one. And if you, instead of scrolling down the page, I got confused. Okay. So you sure that you don't accidentally. Which one, another one? You think you're answering? Correct.
Yeah, so, okay. Yeah, my computer, I keep getting notifications that I'm having network issues, so, oh, Megan says my vote is only the documents necessary.
I will say that the documents are still there for you. They're in the public libraries section, so you will see them no matter what. What we would do on our end is just under that open tab, remove everything you don't need. That way it's just the individual documents relevant to you specifically.
Yeah.
I don't have Excel. So can you PDF those documents? Is there another way to access them?
Okay.
Yes, they're in the library. So under files, they will remain there.
Are you asking about the full application spreadsheet?
Yes,
That's
Is
a
it open in
good
Google
question.
Sheets?
yes.
It may.
It was an Excel.
Can you get
It's like
it?
open in Google Sheets.
Push on it.
I think you would have to copy it because the agencies uploaded the Excel files. Oh, sorry. So Rob's asking if they can be uploaded into Google Sheets. I think the only way to do that is if you were to copy and paste the Excel and then put it into Google Sheets. Because the agencies download an Excel file specifically from Bonfire. They fill out that Excel file. They upload that file back into Bonfire, and Bonfire automatically puts it into that other system that they have.
Yeah.
You can use the bonfire system to see the individual responses.
Exactly.
And you
So,
can actually
So I click on the question and so you can see the.
yeah, my computer's not working.
Okay.
I have to, when I'm sharing, like close out.
So what
email.
it's doing is it's saying that my drive is not responding, so I can't open anything, which is super annoying. But maybe if you could pull it up and share your screen, yeah, that might work. So Faye, what I'm thinking we can do for you and anyone else who doesn't have Excel is I can print out all of the applications that you'll be reviewing and mail them to you so that you can have like a printed copy, but then you should still be able to do the scoring in Bonfire without having Excel. Does that work?
Yes, that should be fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think you have this stuff.
Okay, I'm gonna stop share. Oh no, I can send yours, Kayla. But I'll need to pull this up so everyone can see.
And we'll be quick. I think we should, because it'll walk through some more what it looks like in the next slides too. But really quick to just show you guys what it looks like when agencies submit.
Yeah, sorry we're having tech issues, you guys.
It's not going to smell up. It's okay. All right, so we'll pull up just the first one I have here. This is what you will see if you go to download, except it will be completed fully. So you'll have your instructions tabs, which will be the same for the RFAs across the board. The summary, which will just be a full green bar, it should say 100% complete, and there's no missing information. And then you'll see your response here. Responses will be cut off, so it will be important to open this or click on it, and you should see a bunch of words here for the full explanation. It's just really important that if you are going to work in this document, that you make sure to add your scores into Bonfire. We can't accept scoring on these Excel sheets, but if you want to use them for your own notes and everything, that is totally fine.
All right. Can we go back to sharing the PowerPoint? Okay, is that back? Yep. All right, so continuing in Bonfire, we already talked about where to find the submissions. And then if you have any questions about how to use Bonfire, the system offers technical assistance for evaluators. There's a question mark in the bottom left of your screen that can help you troubleshoot, or feel free to reach out to Kayla and I, and we can help you problem solve any issues that you're having. Before we talk about scoring groups, are there any other questions about Bonfire? Okay, moving forward, so I sent out these groups over email, but these are the scoring groups for this year. I'm working on a more detailed spreadsheet that's going to outline exactly which applications you will be funding in these categories and where to find them, and I'll send it out to you all when it's complete. And once the technical correction process is completed, we'll assign these applications for scoring in Bonfire, and I'll reach out to notify you all when the applications are ready for scoring. So in group one, we have the Eviction Prevention Rental Assistance Program applications. There are 10 applications in this category, and then this group will also be scoring the Community Action Program Income and Asset Building applications. There's only one in this category, and the Community Action Program Transportation applications, and there's also only one in this category. And this group consists of Faye, Diana, Amy, and Clover. In group two, you'll be scoring outreach, permanent supportive housing, and core supports. Kayla, do you remember how many specifically are in each of those categories?
I have
And while she's pulling that up, this group is Brittany, Lily, Ernie, and Rob. And for group three, you'll be scoring the Community Action Program physical health applications. These are for food assistance and dental assistance. There's 5 applications in this category, as well as rapid rehousing and temporary housing and shelter.
Mm-hmm. And there's 6 for outreach, 4 for PSH, 1 for SOAR, 2, 3, 4, 5 for rapid rehousing, and 3 for shelter or transitional housing.
Yeah, so each group has about 12 applications in it. And then for Brondelin, since Share submitted applications in a lot of these categories, we just spread out your applications to review which ones Share did not have applications for. So these include temporary housing and shelter, core supports, the Community Action Program Income and Asset Building, and Community Action Program Transportation. So again, I'll be sending out a much more detailed spreadsheet with these in terms of exactly which applications you'll be scoring and which RFA to find those in.
And Brittany, right, is with YWCA.
Yeah, so Brittany, in group 2, there shouldn't be any YWCA applications. All right, any questions on these? Okay. Oh, sorry, did I hear a question? Okay, So just some tips about the scoring process. Like I said, before you even get into the applications, I would start by reviewing the documents in that public files category. When we talk about our specific applications, we'll talk about which files are the most important for you to review. It takes about 45 minutes to an hour to score each application.
All right, hey everyone. So this is where the meeting recording cut off. So I'm just gonna get started. So like I said, we recommend getting started scoring applications as soon as possible. Each application will probably take about 45 minutes to an hour to score. So we really recommend, getting started early and leaving plenty of time for application. Please reach out to staff for any assistance. You can reach out to me for help on the Community Action Program applications, or to Kayla for help with the community or with the Homeless Crisis Response System applications. And use those guidance documents that we mentioned. They're really, really helpful and outline all of the questions and how to score them. And like we said, scores are due April 25th, 2025. All right, so there's two types of questions that you'll see in the RFA. They're either subjective or objective questions, and we'll talk through all the questions in detail, but just as an overview, subjective questions use personal interpretation and opinion of responses to score questions, and these questions are scored by CAAB members. They are guided by predetermined criteria, which we'll cover, but are really, up to personal interpretation for how you allocate scores. And then objective questions use really clear predetermined criteria to score. So it'll be laid out in terms of how many points certain questions will get based on their answers. The scoring is really independent of scorers' judgment or opinions, and anyone scoring these questions would allocate the same number. So these questions are scored by Department of Community Services staff. This knowledge check was done during the live training, so we will just skip right through that. All right, so this next section is about scoring applications through an equity lens and addressing bias. And the information that I'm going to share was requested by CAAB members during our last equity training meeting. And Ma Caroline sent me a number of resources to base this on, and I worked with her to create these slides. All right, so first of all, what does it mean to score through an equity lens? Scoring applications through an equity lens means evaluating proposals not just on their merit, but also by considering how they specifically address the needs of historically marginalized communities and actively work to dismantle systemic inequities, prioritizing projects that demonstrably aim to create fair outcomes for all groups, not just the majority. And you'll see that we have a few questions in the RFA that specifically address this description right here. Some key aspects to consider when scoring through an equity lens is the program's impact on underserved populations. So evaluating how well the proposed project targets and directly benefits marginalized communities. Community engagement, so assessing the level of community input and involvement in designing the project and ensuring the needs of the target population are truly represented. Addressing systemic barriers, so analyzing whether the proposal identifies and actively works to dismantle systemic inequities that may hinder access to services or opportunities. A data-driven approach, so really looking for evidence that the applicant uses data to understand the disparities within their target community and tailor their project accordingly. And organizational capacity and community representation. So evaluating whether the organization has the experience, expertise, and internal structures necessary to effectively serve diverse communities and address potential equity concerns. Next, we're going to talk a bit about scoring bias. So as you know, bias is prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, usually in a way that is unfair. And there's a few different types of scoring bias that we'll talk through. The first is affinity bias. This is having a more favorable opinion of those similar to us. So this could be personal in terms of race, gender, ethnicity, or it could be organizations that are made up of people similar to us or do work that we're more familiar with. The halo or horns effect. This is the tendency for a single positive rating to cause raters to inflate all other ratings, or a single negative rating to cause raters to deflate all other ratings. The contrast bias is comparing applications with one another rather than looking at each application individually. And this can cause raters to overestimate or underestimate a program's capacity depending on the other applications that they're comparing it with. So one thing while you're reviewing applications that's really important is considering each application on its own rather than as a comparison to the other ones you've reviewed. The central tendency bias causes raters to score every question on a scale near the center. So this would mean across all the applications you score, just kind of scoring in the middle, because, some people think that, an average score makes the most sense. Really, we want to focus on what the application merits, what the program deserves, not just making them all consistent. The leniency or strictness bias is similar. This is scoring consistently too high or too low. The recency bias leads to overestimates or underestimates if the organization being scored recently had a good streak or a bad streak. So again, it's really important to score applications based on the program being proposed and the application that you're reviewing rather than your outside knowledge of that organization and what they do. And lastly, we have worship of the written word. This is the tendency to only value writing that fits within a narrow standard and often favors those who write in a traditionally academic manner or have perfect grammar. And worship of the written word falls under the category of white supremacy culture, which we've talked about in the equity trainings. We have a tendency to have more respect for people who write in the way that we do. And there are many people within community-based organizations who may write or speak in a different way. However, their impact on the community could be greater than someone who has historically had more privileges and has had the formal education needed to write in a way that meets within academic standards. So just something to consider as you're reviewing applications, whether you're judging based on the content or based on how it's written. All right, so some methods of avoiding scoring bias. Each scoring committee member is required to verify that they don't have a conflict of interest. You've all done this through the conflict of interest form that you signed. Like I said, scorers should also focus on the content of the application, not outside knowledge, and score each application and question separately from the others, not as a comparison. And just to reiterate, there is an expectation and role and responsibility of CAAB members to score without bias. So one thing that you can do is bring it back to the scoring guide that we've mentioned to really focus back on each application and question individually and how that question merits certain scores rather than, as a comparison or based on what you know about an agency. All right, so next we're going to talk about the specifics of the Community Action Program RFA. And here we're going to get into the specific questions that were asked and how to score each of those. So first of all, there were 7 applications received for the Community Action Program request for applications. They're under those 3 categories that we've discussed. There were 5 applications under physical health, 3 for food assistance, and 2 for dental services. You can see here the amount that was requested and the anticipated total funding for this category. There was 1 application received under the income and asset building category and 1 under the transportation category. So how these categories and scoring works is basically scorers will assign a score to each application. And within each category, whatever organization receives the highest score will receive their full funding award, up to, the total anticipated amount of funding. And then if there's still funds left in that category, it will move to the second highest scored application. So one thing to note for the income and asset building and transportation categories is that since there's only one application under these categories, if the CAAB decides to fund these programs, they'll receive their entire requested amount. And one thing that I just want to flag is that the New Life Recovery Services Transportation Program is moving forward to the CAAB because it does have a transportation component, but the program they're proposing is primarily a peer support and recovery program, which would fit within a behavioral health category that wasn't solicited for funds this year. And we only stop applications from moving forward if they fully don't meet the solicitation requirements. So it is moving to the CAAB to score. And like I said, since it's the only application in this category, it would receive the full amount if the CAAB recommends it for funding. However, if the CAAB doesn't think that the application meets the program intention, scorers can score it as 0, and the funds for that category can be moved to the physical health category that has more applications. And I'm not recommending one way or the other. The funding awards and scores are fully up to the CAAB at this point. Just something that I wanted to mention. And this can also be discussed at our May meeting after you all have had a chance to review and score applications, and when we discuss how funding is going to be recommended for awards. All right, next we're going to talk about some important library documents to review. We already mentioned in the bonfire section about where to find these library documents, but for the community action program, the ones that I would mainly recommend reviewing are the best and emerging practices for community action program definitions. This document goes through some of the best and emerging practices that we ask applicants about in the application process. They had a question where they reported on which of these practices they're planning to use in their program. So it's important that you all are familiar with what those mean. The second document is definitions for community action programs. This just provides broad definitions for key terms used throughout the application. And then the third document to review, which I think you all have already reviewed, is the community needs assessment. Like I said, this document is how we determine which categories were to be funded for this RFA, and is just a really valuable resource as you're looking through applications. Okay, so the application questionnaire has 4 question sets. When you pull it up in the Excel spreadsheet, there'll be 4 tabs at the bottom of the spreadsheet, and each one is a question set. Or if you're reading it directly in Bonfire, you'll be able to click through those question sets as well. So the first question set is about program design. The second is about equity. The third is about program management plan. And the fourth is about budget. And like I said, subjective questions will be scored by the CAAB, and objective questions will be scored by Department of Community Services staff. So there's some additional documents which were submitted with each application, and staff have already reviewed these to make sure they're complete, but you're welcome to look at them if you want. The 2 documents that really relate to the application form are the budget table and the letters of collaboration. So the budget table is essentially where they break out their budget by category, talk about any other funding that they're going to use to support this program. And this total budget matches what they have in the application form. But if you're looking for more detail, you can pull up this spreadsheet. And then the letters of collaboration, there is a question in the application that asks about partnerships with other organizations. And we asked applicants to submit formal letters of collaboration for each partnership that they're declaring. So if you're reviewing this question and want to see those letters of collaboration, those are also available in Bonfire. These other documents, like the conflict of interest form, anti-lobbying form, e-verify MOU, etc., are really just more administrative documents that we needed from the county side to ensure that they would be able to meet grant requirements. So these have all already been reviewed and approved so that applications could move on to the CAAB scoring phase. But if you're curious, those are available in Bonfire for you to view. Okay, so let's get into the questions in detail. And all of these questions and scoring details were directly copied and pasted from the guidance document. This was provided to all applicants when the RFA opened, so they were aware of how each question would be scored before they filled out their application. So, and you all have access to this guidance document like we've talked about if you want to go back and review how to score questions. All right, so we'll start with the first question set, program design. And question 1 in this category is worth 10 points, and it asked applicants to describe the proposed program in detail. We asked them to specify what assistance or services the program would provide, how, when, and where services would be provided, who would be served, who would provide services, and how the funding would be used. So this question is subjective, it's scored by the CAAB. High scores would indicate that the program is well planned and a detailed explanation is provided. Mid-range would indicate that program planning is mostly complete with some variables yet to be determined. And low scoring would indicate that program planning is still underway or this is a new program for the agency. Question 2 in this category is also worth 10 points and is also scored by the CAAB. We asked applicants to describe the need in Clark County for the proposed program. So to detail all issues that would be addressed with this program and why the funds are needed, and also to refer to the community needs assessment and other data sources to justify the need for the program. So high scores would mean that the program is a critical need and couldn't move forward without the requested funding. Mid-range would mean that the program is a fairly high need in the community and the requested funding is important to the budget. And low scoring would mean that the program's a medium or low need and could seek other funding options or wait for future funding cycles. Question 3 in this category is worth 5 points, and this is scored by Clark County Community Services staff because it's objective. The question was to describe the location where assistance will be provided and how assistance will be accessed by people who are low income throughout the county. So we would allocate high scores if the program is both mobile and site-based. Mid-range scores would mean that the program is only site-based, and low scores would mean that it is not accessible or has limited accessibility for people who are low income. Question 4 is worth 5 points and is also scored by staff. This was to specify which best or emerging practices the proposed program will utilize. This references back to that best and emerging practices document that I talked about, which you can find in the Bonfire public files. This is an objective question. So high scores would mean that 4 or more best emerging practices are identified. Mid-range would mean 3 best emerging practices are identified, and low scores would mean 1 to 2 were identified. Question 5 is to explain how the program incorporates a trauma-informed care approach. Again, we asked them to reference that document. This is subjective, scored by the CAAB, and high scores would indicate that trauma-informed approaches are fully integrated into the agency and proposed program. Mid-range scores would mean they're moderately integrated, and low scores would mean that they're minimally integrated. And this is one of those times when I'd really reference back to that document and the resources we provided to make sure you understand what a trauma-informed care approach really means. Question 6 isn't worth any points, it's just to provide information. Asks applicants to describe how the program will ensure only people who are low income will be assisted, and it include program income limits. This is really for us to make sure that agencies are able to meet the grant requirements. So per the grant requirements, clients served have to be under 200% of the federal poverty level. You'll see that some of the applications talk about how their current agency income limits are higher than that, like 250 or 300% of the federal poverty level. That's totally fine. We just wanted to get this information so that we could reach out and say, hey, just so you know, if you're awarded funds, the program has these specific requirements, so prepare for those as needed. Okay, question 7 is also information only, no points, and is to specify the proposed annual program outputs and how they will be measured, to include the number of individuals in our households that will meet each of the outputs, and to describe how the outputs were determined. So just for all of your awareness, there is a difference between an output and an outcome if you're not already familiar with this. The next question asks about outcomes, so it's important to know the difference. An output is a direct and measurable product of the program's activities or services, and this is often expressed in terms of units. So, hours, number of people, or completed actions, and it refers to the activities that will be conducted and the people they hope to reach. So some examples would be, number of individuals who received dental services, or number of food boxes provided, those type of things. And importantly, the outputs that they propose in these applications would be included in the contract if it was awarded. All right, question 8 asks about outcomes. And this one is worth 5 points and is scored by the CAAB. So an outcome is the result or impact of activities or services, often expressed in terms of an increase in understanding and improvements in desired behaviors or attitudes of participants. So outcomes tend to be more longer term, higher level goals. So for example, for a dental program, like I said, the output would be the number of individuals who receive services. The outcome would be the number of individuals who have improved physical dental health because they received those services. So one thing to look at is to make sure that the application really is specifying outcomes here, not outputs. And again, these would be included in the contract if it were to be awarded. So high scores would indicate that the program has a large positive impact for low-income individuals and households, and that the agency is able to clearly describe the proposed outcomes and how they will be measured. Mid-range scores would mean that the program would have a moderate impact for low-income individuals and households, and the outcome measurement plan is somewhat clear. And low scores would mean that the program has limited impact, and the outcome measurement plan is unclear. Question 9, no points, information only, and it's to indicate which priority populations would be served by the program. Question 10 is worth 10 points and is scored by the CAAB. This is to describe how services will assist households to move towards self-sufficiency. And we ask that they include reference and data that support their answer to the question. So high scores would mean that the program has a large positive impact on the self-sufficiency of low-income households. And the agency clearly describes how services promote self-sufficiency and that the impact is supported by data. Mid-range would mean that the program has a moderate impact on self-sufficiency, and low scores would mean that the program has a limited impact on the self-sufficiency of low-income households and doesn't really include data to support their answer. Question 11 is worth 5 points and is scored by the CAAB. This asked applicants to specify how the program would integrate services with other community programs. This is really asking about partnerships in the community. And we asked them to specify relevant connections with other community programs and how households are referred between programs. And you'll see in the next question, there's a follow-up where we ask about those formal letters of collaboration. But for this question, high scores would indicate the agency has robust partnerships with other community programs, and utilizes those to provide additional assistance and promote self-sufficiency for households after program exit. Mid-range would mean they have moderate and developing partnerships, and low scores would mean they have limited or no partnerships, or they don't utilize those partnerships to help households. All right, like I said, this next question is a follow-up to the question about partnerships. We asked agencies to include a formal letter of collaboration for each of the partnerships that they declared. And these can be found in Bonfire if you'd like to see them. This is an objective question scored by staff, and applicants will get 1 point for each letter of collaboration that they submitted. All right, moving on to the next question set, which is about equity. There's 3 questions in this question set. The first is worth 5 points and is scored by the CAAB. It is to briefly describe the agency's experience providing assistance to people who are low income in Clark County. So high scores would show that the agency has extensive experience providing assistance to people who are low income in all areas of Clark County. Mid-range means that they have moderate experience helping some people in Clark County or in some areas, and low scores would mean limited experience providing assistance to people who are low income in Clark County. And it's important here that they address how they assist specifically low income community members rather than the community in general, since these funds are designated for low income community members. Okay, equity question number 2. This ties back to that scoring through an equity lens section that we talked about. So this question is worth 10 points. It's scored by the CAAB. It's pretty long and has a lot of parts, so I'll just read through it. Marginalized populations, including people of color, struggle disproportionately with poverty. Clark County is committed to addressing this inequity by prioritizing opportunities to serve historically underserved communities, removing barriers to fairness in representation, opportunity, and access, and providing equal opportunity for very low-income families of all ethnic backgrounds. Describe how this proposal will ensure equitable outcomes for marginalized populations. And there's 5 parts of this question. You'll see that each part is worth 2 points. The sub-questions we asked are: describe the historically underserved and marginalized communities in your program area. Include demographics and other factual data in your response. The second is: how have you connected to these underserved communities in planning for your program? Third is: what feedback were you provided from these communities, and how will you implement the feedback into this program? Fourth is: what specific steps is this program taking to ensure the services are accessible to marginalized and underserved communities? And fifth is to identify how this proposal will specifically benefit marginalized and underserved populations in Clark County. So like I said, this question is subjective, it's scored by the CAAB, and there's up to 2 points awarded for each question area addressed. So high scores would mean the program has a strong commitment to equity through comprehensive responses to all 5 of the question areas. And low scores would demonstrate minimal commitment to equity through limited responses to the question areas. Okay, the third equity question is worth 5 points and asks about the anti-poverty or pay equity tools that agencies are using to inform decisions regarding their staff compensation. This is also a subjective question scored by the CAAB, and high scores would indicate that the agency uses pay equity tools to inform decisions regarding staff compensation rates, and low scores would mean that they don't use tools. Mid-range would mean that they have developing processes to compensate staff based on pay equity tools. Okay, moving to question set 3, which asks about management plan. The first question is worth 5 points and is scored by the CAAB and asks to describe the management plan for the program. So staffing, case management, to client ratio, units of service, etc. High scores would mean the program is well planned or program management is well planned and a detailed description is provided, and that the agency has experience managing similar programs. Mid-range would mean that the management plan is mostly complete but lacks detail, And low scoring would mean that the plan is minimal or the agency has limited experience managing similar programs. Management plan question 2 is worth 4 points, also scored by the CAAB. It is to discuss the quality management plan related to accurate and complete HMIS data entry and HMIS reporting. One thing that I want to note about this question is that some of the programs awarded Community Action Program funding, especially food assistance programs, aren't required to utilize HMIS. We talked about this quite a bit in the live session, and one thing that is really helpful if you're unsure whether a program does or doesn't need to utilize HMIS is whether or not they are proposing to provide direct services to clients or supportive services in their budget. So if you pull up their budget table and they have funding they're asking for under the supportive services category, that typically means that they are going to be providing direct services or direct, providing like items to clients. And in those cases, they would be required to report in HMIS. If they're just asking for like staffing and operations funds, then they're probably providing more of like a general assistance program, like providing food boxes. So in those cases, they would not be required to report in HMIS. So if for programs that are required to report in HMIS, high scores would mean that they have extensive experience and staff are trained to utilize HMIS in an accurate and timely manner. Mid-range would mean they have some experience or a plan to train staff, and low scoring would mean they have minimal or no experience and don't have a plan to train staff for how to do this. Management plan question 3 is worth 4 points, scored by the CAAB. This asked agencies to describe how they would ensure the program is following program guidelines and monitoring requirements. High scores would detail several years' experience with federal funding requirements and a proven ability to follow similar program guidelines. Mid-range would indicate some experience with federal funds or some experience with similar program, but maybe they lack some detail. And low scores would indicate minimal experience with federal funding or project type. Management plan question 4 isn't worth any points, just for information, and asks if agencies have entered into a contract with Clark County Community Services in the last 5 years. And then question 5 is a follow-up to that last question. This is scored by staff, and if they answered yes to question 4, we would ask them, how has your agency demonstrated an ability to meet the required deadlines? So have invoices and reports been submitted on time? And high scores would mean the agency has consistently submitted all documents by the required deadlines or requested extensions in advance. Mid-range would mean they submitted most of them, and low range would mean that they are consistently late on submitting the required documents. And the reason this is a staff scored question is because we have the information and history on these programs to score it. Okay, moving into the budget section. The first question isn't worth any points, just for information, and it's just asking how much funding are agencies requesting. The second question is worth 5 points and is scored by staff. It asks if the program will leverage other funding sources and to identify those and describe them. So agencies would get 5 points if the program leverages other funding sources to support 45% or more of the program costs, and fewer points for the smaller percentages of program costs that other funding sources would cover. And the reason that we score the question in this way is because having additional funding to support programs ensures that the program can be maintained in case county funding were to be reduced, or it also means that the program just has more support to operate successfully. All right, and this is where the recording started again.
Yep.
All right, and then the third question under budget is to list what supportive services costs are included. So if they list costs in this category, which would be, you know, direct services that are provided to clients like gas vouchers, supplies, etc., then they would need to report in HMIS. And the responses to this question have to match the budget table. There was one agency where they declared costs in supportive services that were actually operations costs. So that was one of the technical questions that I reached out to them about and said, hey, these aren't supportive service costs, we're gonna need you to modify your application. So this should all be resolved by the time it gets to you guys. And this is for information, doesn't have any points. Again, this is all found in the guys' document. Really throwing this one home. And you guys know, oh, thanks, Brittany. Brittany says ICR's indirect cost rate.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. And yeah, you guys know where to find this.
Representation right there.
Love that. Okay, knowledge check. So what types of questions are scored by the CAAB versus by community services staff? If you understand the concept, that's okay.
Does anybody in the online world want to volunteer that one?
Does anyone online know?
I was gonna say if subjective and objective.
Yes, that is correct. Subjective and objective. Where can you find reference documents such as the CNA and best practices document?
On the community services page.
Yep, on the community services page and also in the bonfire public files. And then where can you find guidance documents for all the scoring information?
Bonfire and email.
Woohoo! And the website. Nice.
AI will tell you. Just
Okay, now I'm gonna pass it to Kayla. How are we doing? Do we need another break or do we wanna just keep pushing through?
Anyone online? Are we good to push through?
I wouldn't mind a 5-minute break.
Yeah, let's do a 5-minute break.
Thank you.
Okay, it's 11:10. Let's come back at 11:15. Hey everyone, welcome back. While we were on break, Amy had a question in the room, so I'm just gonna ask her to repeat that so we can answer it for you all.
I was wondering if, because it says that they have to report to HMIS if they give gas cards or school supplies, does that include gift cards?
And the answer is no, we can't allow any gift cards at the county because it's too high of an audit risk.
But I will also say now that I'm hearing more details, I think you're asking just for any of those little things too, like what has to be included in HMIS maybe specifically. The things that have to be included are things that we describe them for the homeless system as anything that is under like a rent category or a meeting a client need. So if you're paying a household specifically to assist them financially in any kind of way, if we're taking them to Target to get diapers for their kiddo, or taking them to get groceries or gas cards or whatever it is, or paying rent, those are all transactions that have to be in HMIS. Because what HMIS does is it tells us when we go to the team and say, I need to know how much our programs are spending on what services, it will report, pull a report and say, right now your system is spending $100,000 on groceries and essential needs items, $500,000 on rental assistance specifically. And that's all stuff too that is, I think, broken down more thoroughly for you guys, kind of in those quarterly reports where it tells you how much of the budget is spent, and then what items are being serviced through those contracts.
Okay, so even like helping somebody be like, for instance, maybe they do flagging or something and they needed their card updated, it wouldn't be for something like that, like.
So those are going to be very, those are a little more niche and specific to each individual contract. So each contract, and we'll get into this a little bit more, this is where the homeless system gets more complicated because each program type has specific requirements for what we can service and what we cannot. And then each grant is different too. So like the ones that Rebecca oversees, for example, TBRA, which is a HUD program, federal program, they can't allow for certain client services. They can only provide rental assistance, versus our programs here, even though they might be similar in operations, we have the flexibility to allow for additional supports, groceries, vouchers, you know, pretty much. I'm not going to say anything because we have a lot of limitations, but there's clear guidelines, and I'll kind of touch base on where you can find what those guidelines are.
Yeah, that'd be
if you're interested.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go ahead and get started for the homeless crisis response system. Please stop me, especially if you're in one of the groups for a specific question we're going over. You're also able to access me anytime if you have technical assistance. With the response system, the questionnaires are different for each category because we have a different set of criteria. So if you have questions or want to know more about the why things are scored differently across program types, please just stop me and ask. Go ahead and go forward. All right, so we received 10 applications for prevention, and those are listed here, and 6 for outreach. Go ahead. And then we received 2 shelter applications, 1 application for transitional housing. Important to note for the YWCA shelter application, that is an enhancement to an existing shelter, and you'll be able to read more about that too. So they already have their existing shelter in operations, but they're looking to expand their program. For outsiders in St. Paul's shelter, this was a program that was previously funded through the county, and so typically shelters, like I had noted at the beginning, they do not have to go through a procurement process, but we identified that they have not gone through, this organization has not come through a homeless crisis response specific application process, and so we were requiring them to do that because all shelters that we do fund can't come in out of nowhere. They do at least have to go through one procurement process to validate. So that's why this shelter is coming in this process. And then we have 2 applications for permanent supportive housing, and each of those agencies also submitted applications for HUD match. What HUD match is the Impact Northwest and Share. They have a federal program through HUD for PSH, and HUD requires them to match 25% of their, I believe if it's their non-rental costs, but HUD has a requirement for agencies to match a certain amount when they're awarded with those dollars. And so these 2 agencies are requesting us to pretty much reimburse them for that match amount. So that's why you'll see two agencies coming in for a same type of program. They are different in nature though. And then we have 5 for rapid rehousing and 1 for SOAR. Go ahead. Unless anyone has questions, did anyone have questions about clarifying any of these? Yeah.
Are each of these service activity types described in the guidance document?
Correct. So they are described in the definitions, and then they are also, the first question we'll go through provides a definition for the agencies as well. So your response system application questionnaires, your scoring will be via Bonfire, as Abby went over already. You're going to go to that submissions, documents and data, and then find your questionnaire that's relevant to the program type. Be very careful that you're selecting the correct questionnaire, otherwise you won't be able to have access to score. And then each service type has their own questionnaire and scoring criteria. Agencies might have more than 1 application for an individual service type. It's kind of what we noted previously about PSH. They will have 2 PSH applications, but you will see them come in as share PSH, share alternate PSH if they're submitting 2 applications for the same service type. And then again, subjective and objective scores will be separated out based on whether or not you're CAAB or DCS staff. The library documents, so the administrative documents that I noted that are all visible to you currently are the conflict of interest, the copy or certification of their nonprofit status, an anti-lobbying form, their in-kind valuation template, an E-Verify MOU, and then their pre-app questionnaire, which again just asks them basic administrative questions and lets us assess their fiscal capacity. And then documents that you will need to utilize to prepare for scoring. The number one, to start, I would recommend getting familiar with the Homeless Action Plan. So this is available on Council for the Homeless's website. This is, we'll touch base on it more, but pretty much you will just want to understand the basis and design of what this is and what it aims to do. But I have a slide on that coming up. We also have the homeless crisis response system definitions, which we'll also get into here in a moment. Best and emerging practices, and then your extra credits, which we noted on a few minutes ago, was some of those funding differences and guidelines. So all of the homeless crisis response system contracts are required to follow the SDG guidelines. The SDG guidelines come directly from the Washington State Department of Commerce. They are much higher, a much higher overview of the requirements for every contract that we service with these funds. And so you are welcome to go in there, get familiar, know what it looks like, but I would not spend too much time trying to understand all the nuances of the guidelines because they are, again, just a very overarching view of everything that we have to adhere to as the funder, but also our subgrantees have to adhere to as well. And then for scoring, the items relevant to you will be the RFA guidance, again, and then your budget proposals if you'd like to peek at the allocations for how much is going into each category. Okay, so I'm going to go through the documents, and again, if you have any questions, please just let me know. We're going to look at the HAP, our best practices, and then our homeless crisis response system definitions. And we will pull them. Oh, I have them. Okay. I have the full copies, but they're very, very long. So it's okay. Figured you screen share. I don't think you need to yet, but I'll get it if I need it. Okay, so starting with the Homeless Action Plan, this is a requirement. The state law requires communities that receive funds from Commerce to adopt a Homeless Action Plan. This plan will prioritize, guide, and evaluate our community efforts to prevent and end homelessness. The current plan is located at that link right there. It is pretty detailed. You can see my screen. I'm sure you see the little can. But it is many pages long. It goes into all of the goals that the county has set. It is Council for the Homeless is the entity that develops this plan. Council for the Homeless is the entity that the City of Vancouver, the VHA, and Clark County has designated as kind of our community lead for leading the initiative on homelessness and system level efforts. So that again is some of the, this work we fund through a non-competitive procurement process, and they do all the research and development, and we work closely with them to ensure they're meeting all the state guidelines that are in there. We also have a report on the outcomes of the HAP. We publish one of those every single year, but it is for the year prior. So the one that just went live in December of 2024 outlines the outcomes from 2023. And the reason for that is because it is a very detailed plan and it takes time to pull all the data and go through what that means for the community and provide updates. So Council for the Homeless generally takes that year to develop their reports and findings and present it in a different form. So that's all available online. You will also notice that this says 2019 to 2022. This plan is overdue. The plan went live during COVID previously, and developments on the next plan were postponed until the state could reevaluate or had the means to reevaluate the needs at the state level. So we are currently, as of January, working with Council for the Homeless and the state, now that the state's guidance has gone live, to develop the new plan for the next few years. That will be due in December of this year. So for now, with this RFA, the agencies are required to follow the existing plan and goals that are in that plan. However, at the end of the year, once we adopt our new plan, it's likely we will have to work with the agencies to identify ways we can implement items in the new plan if they aren't already being implemented. Does anybody have questions about the HAP specifically?
Only that the need is greater.
Yeah, oh, 100%. Yes.
The plan has to change when the needs change.
Yeah.
Well, I hope they get it right the first time.
Right, yeah, and it's pretty developed. The only kind of standstill we're at right now is most of the goals in this, if not all of the goals, have already been met or exceeded and have been since 2022. So that's kind of where we've been in a pause because it does take a lot of work, a lot of manpower, a lot of time to develop. And we also require that state guidance, and the state has told us up until the last, year, 6 months that they were not able to release guidance for us until a few months ago, where we finally got it. So just delays due to the pandemic.
Which agency did that? The state writes the guidance?
Well, the Washington State Department of Commerce provides the guidance, but it's all based on legislature.
Oh, makes sense.
All right, let's go ahead. We're next going to go over to the best and emerging practices and our homeless crisis response definition. So with these ones, Abby, actually, I think we probably should pull this one up. Do a screen share in a second. Okay, so our best and emerging practices, these are approaches to rendering our housing services to individuals. These are proven to work in producing greater than average results. And then this is what this looks like. So this is available to you. It's one of your documents that you should be reviewing and getting familiar with prior to scoring. And then it goes over our consumer involvement, peer support, and our mentorship requirements, trauma-informed approach, positive youth development, motivational interviewing, what SOAR is, and service integration or wraparound services, housing first, supported employment, harm reduction, and progressive engagement. So there's definitions there. There's links to where you can find more information for each of these things. All of our agencies already implement this because we require them to, and I think we're good on that one. Unless anyone has specific questions, or if anyone wants to dive deeper into any of the practices for clarification. And then the next one is the homeless crisis response system definitions. So for the definitions, it provides a broad overview of the service activity types. Please be mindful that some of these definitions are too broad for our system. So it will go in for rapid rehousing and it'll tell you components. It'll go in for PSH, transitional housing, everything that we're funding. It will tell you a broad definition, maybe some information on caseload, and then if you see anything in here on timelines, the reason for that is that the information that we're pulling is not grant specific, which means that it is, when I say too broad, it means there's some components in here, like under rapid rehousing, for example, it says rapid rehousing services are typically less than 24 months. For our homeless crisis response system and for state funds that we, state grant guidelines that we require all of our homeless crisis response system agencies to follow, we cannot have time limits. So if you see something in here that has a time limit, disregard it. It does not matter if the agency is not aligning 100% with this definition. You will see the definition that the agencies are required to meet in our first RFA question when we get there. But for general overviews, for more information on the style and approaches of programs, refer to your homeless crisis response system definitions for those.
FTE's full-time employee.
Yes.
Okay.
Full-time employee or full-time equivalent?
Full-time equivalent. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and those aren't, those might not be entirely up to date either because of us pulling different information from a variety of grants as well. But the FTE requirements are something we work with our agencies in determining, and I can't remember the last time it was updated, but they're predetermined. And we work with them based on the feedback that we get and the outcomes too that happen in the community. We need to change
So
those.
most of these are right though, I mean, like,
The general presentation of what the program is correct, yes, but I wouldn't get too hung up on the exact number of times or FTEs. That's something that we will work with as we're doing like the TA and the confirmation of service administration. What you guys, we really want you to do is assess the program and what it's giving to our community and to our homeless population. Do we have any additional questions on either?
Are there agencies who use volunteers to relieve caseload sizes?
Correct. I don't know if they use them to reduce caseload sizes specifically, but all of our agencies block volunteer hours, yes. I don't think that they can for caseloads because of the trainings and additional requirements for case managers to go through and approaches.
Well, I'm thinking in terms of there are rote procedural things in any job that a volunteer could manage for a caseworker so that they're focused on.
Yeah, actually, this might, I might throw it off, actually. I don't know if Brittany or Brondolin's here. Do you guys have an answer for that? Do you use volunteer hours to reduce your caseloads at all, or are volunteer
Well,
hours?
you get volunteer hours to support higher caseloads. So the caseworker isn't doing other things.
Yeah, I'm not sure, honestly. Bronwyn?
I would say not specifically to reduce the caseload, but there are like special services sometimes where our case managers will deliver food or coordinate food pickups, and we can work with volunteers to help like address those type of needs. But to actually manage the caseloads, there's components of confidentiality that volunteers probably would not be privy to. So that would probably be my biggest concern, just thinking off the top of my head.
Okay. So
Well,
yes,
that could be
then.
the answer, yeah.
Yes. So for reducing other aspects not specific to direct client services, that's what I'll do for you.
I think Brittany maybe had something to add.
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak on behalf of YWCA. I don't know what other organizations are doing. For us, we struggled to get volunteers because of the since we do domestic violence and sexual assault work, we require a minimum of 1 year commitment. It's over 40 hours of training because of state requirements to be able to do that advocacy. And then the like vicarious trauma that people are exposed to, often they will come in to volunteer and then realize it's more than what they anticipated it being. So for us specifically, we struggled to get volunteers for those specific kind of advocacy tasks. So it isn't something that typically would help with case management.
Is that training or the 40 hours training that you have to do that, if people are able to carry that on to something else later, or is that just 40 hours from just volunteering for the YWCA?
I think it's a domestic violence specific training that the state requires.
Correct. Yeah, it's training that around domestic violence and sexual assault services that the state requires.
Which it sounds like if you were to go to another agency within the state and want to do volunteer hours, and they also serve that population, that requirement should be met across agencies, and it's a state requirement.
Yes.
Something that you've completed those or something? I know it's interesting.
Alrighty, let's go ahead and move to the next slide. Again, funding guide, please use it. It is going to be the most helpful in fully understanding the scope of the agencies had to go through for their application process. And it's going to have your cheat sheet for your questions, which we are going to get into next. So if you would like to follow along, if you have a copy of the funding guide, you can pull up the final pages of that. The questionnaire starts on page 13 of the Homeless Crisis Response System 1. Otherwise, I will show you on your screen. Go ahead to the next one. So question number 1, and this is where things are going to start to get tricky. So every single program has a different questionnaire. So these are not the questionnaires that are going, or these questions will not be the exact for all of you guys across everything. So for rapid rehousing programs, this is the definition you'll see. It's no points awarded, it's information only. We need to confirm that the program meets the description for what we're soliciting. So these descriptions for all of these programs came directly from the Washington State Department of Commerce, and the agency's responses should match exactly what these program descriptions are. So that's one of these things too, where when agencies come in for their presentations, if you are looking at their program description and it's not clear to you 100% that it meets this definition, that would be a good question to clarify with this agency. You could say, it says that rapid rehousing programs quickly move households from homelessness into permanent housing by doing this. Your description does not clearly show me how that's happening. Provide more explanation. And same with all of the other types of services as well. Does anyone, I know we have a handful of new board members, does anyone want to go in or have questions about any of the specific service activities? Does anyone not know what any of the programs are?
I wouldn't mind if you did a general overview.
Okay. So rapid rehousing is a type of program that provides rent subsidies for individuals who just recently fell into homelessness. And it is, I would say it's prevention is complementary to this rapid rehousing. So rapid rehousing catches people that they lost their housing and now they're defined as homeless by the Washington State Department of Commerce SDG guidelines. And they are at or below 80% AMI. And they qualify pretty much to have rental assistance, not time limited. It is housing focused, which means that they will remain in a rapid rehousing program until they're stabilized. So it's a program specifically for homeless individuals who need assistance getting back onto their feet. Permanent supportive housing is a long-term solution to low-income individuals who have permanent disabilities. So if they're not able to support themselves long-term, but they are experiencing instability and they're houseless or they're staying in shelter, this is probably one of the more important programs for individuals who stay in shelters longer term or having struggles getting into a rental unit from shelter, because it might mean that they need additional supports, especially if they're living with a permanent disability. So PSH can be provided as a scattered site model. So that means that they rent in their own units, but they are getting additional services from the agency. Most of our PSH programs in Clark County are facility-based though. So VHA, for example, operates most of the permanent supportive housing buildings. That's where they buy out large buildings and then they lease them out to the clients at a reduced rate if they meet the criteria to be in PSH. But we also fund a few as well. And then street outreach is specifically for groups from agencies that go out to encampments or provide information about agencies and programs out into the community. But it's specifically to assist those experiencing unhoused homelessness and getting them connected with our programs. So going into the encampments, trying to build rapport. There is funds built in there for us to put people directly from the streets into apartments or housing units. However, we should not be placing them into those places unless we're connecting them with like a rapid rehousing program as well, to ensure that they are not kind of just put there and then left to be at risk to fall back into homelessness. So we want to make sure that we're doing a handoff to some kind of program or some kind of connection, or we're confident that we can get them from the street to a stable long-term housing solution or into shelter. And homelessness prevention, EPRAP, that's the other kind of parallel to rapid rehousing, but it catches people before they actually fall into homelessness. So they're still in a unit, but they are at risk because they're falling behind on rent, or they lost their job, or they have an active eviction notice, and they will go through, they'll get screened, and they will get long-term assistance as well, or as long as they need, just not time-limited assistance to maintain their housing and not fall into homelessness, and then they will graduate once they have stability. Let's go to the next slide, there's a few more. All right, and then we have our emergency shelters. So that provides short-term temporary shelters for those experiencing homelessness. We say short-term, but again, there's no stay limits for our shelters. So as long as they need and have qualified and have been placed there and are following, the requirements of that shelter based on their policies and procedures, then they can stay. And staff will work with them to try to get them also connected to a different program for supports, or they will find some kind of housing solution for them to move them out of there. And then transitional housing is subsidized facility-based housing. And it's also designed to provide semi-long-term temporary housing. However, lease and rental agreements are required between the transitional housing project and the household, so it's a little bit different. We don't fund a lot of these programs, but it's helpful in reducing a rent need. It's something that allows individuals to pay a reduced rent, but they don't have to have a disability like the requirement in PSH. And they're able to work with people in-house also, if it's not scatter site, but it's facility-based, to have services while they're in that program before they move on. And then we have SOAR, which is the SSI, SSDI outreach, access and recovery. And it helps individuals who are homeless, who are living with disabilities, expand their benefits. So it's pretty much a program, because of how complicated getting benefits can be. The process is very overwhelming, and when you're already dealing with a trauma such as experiencing homelessness, going through something like that just is such a massive barrier to a lot of households. So this program specifically works to help households complete that process. Our agencies are also, even if they're not working or coming in for SOAR specific funding, our agencies are expected to work with our SOAR provider in connecting households that need assistance. Do you guys have any questions? Those are our service types that we will be funding.
Thank you.
Perfect. All right, let's get into those questions. So question number 2, this is a CAAB scoring. This is, again, it's gonna look weird. So for your homelessness prevention questionnaire, this question is different. For EPRAP, there's 5 points possible. And we're asking if the proposed program is currently under contract. And then for all other items, this is 7 points possible, and we are asking the same thing. So the big thing for this RFA period and the prioritization from the state is that we maintain our existing levels of homeless services. So the reason that people are getting points for if they are a pre-existing program is because we have real life community members in these programs that are meant to be long-term, getting services, And we need to prioritize that we are able to maintain these programs, as opposed to promoting new agencies from coming in. So it's still possible a new agency can come in. It's just that is not the prioritization of the legislature and the state at this point, which is why we have points allocated. And then the differences for points here of why EPRAP versus all the other programs, there's a 2-point difference, is because we had to redistribute some points due to other requirements of EPRAP specifically, which we will get into in one of the later questions where that's awarded. Number 3 is also CAAB scoring. This is where you're going to describe the proposed program in detail. So again, we're looking at the definitions, and that one, which is the info only, yes or no, do you meet this definition? Question number 3 is going to give you the background of why they think they meet that definition, the whole overview of the program and what it looks like, what population they'll be serving. And then again, there's a special note here that we do not limit the time of household. So if you see an application that says we will provide rental assistance for 12 months or for 24 months or for 6 months or whatever it is, it's not an automatic no, but it should not be the highest scoring. Even though it's not designated in here specifically, it does not meet our requirement. We will not contract out, but we will just communicate with the agency that they cannot have that requirement before we go into a contract with them. But again, that can be a clarification piece during the presentations as well.
So you're asking them to provide an estimate on how long a client will receive the service,
Mm-hmm.
Give them end date.
but they're not allowed to say we're exiting all clients after 18 months.
Correct. So they should know, especially because of the prioritization being on pre-existing agencies, they should have a general understanding of how long participants are in their programs. And it's going to look different, right? Because each household is different, and some households are going to be on there for 2+ years, and other households might only need light touch for a couple
As long as
months.
it keeps going how it is, it's gonna, people are gonna keep needing them.
But it's pretty much because we want to understand what the program will look like, but we should never have a strict, after 6 months, you're out of here. So we want to understand the agency, their approach, what they're seeing, but no requirements that households will be exited at a certain point in time. And that is, yeah, again, just a requirement of the state due to us needing to be housing focused.
So estimates of length of assistance shouldn't be treated as a declaration.
Correct, and the agencies could say, yeah, like most of our households will be serviced within 6 months, but if they say our households, if there's like a maximum language in there, or we will serve households for a maximum of 12 months, then that would be a flag that we would want to dig into. Any online questions for that one? All right. Move it forward. Next one, this one's similar to the one that is in the CAAB. We are asking them to describe their commitment to equity and how they plan to put that commitment into practice. And again, you'll have some details on highest versus lowest scoring. Next. This one is different based on program type. This one is different based on pretty much every program type. So for SOAR, you're going to specify the outcomes and how they'll be measured. That one's a little different because, again, SOAR is a very specific approach. But you will have, if you notice in these bullet points, it's going to ask them exactly what they should be inputting here. So if you have SOAR, just make sure when you're going through your guidance document that you're paying attention specifically to the one that's designated as SOAR. Same thing with outreach. So for outreach, we're also asking about the outcomes and how they'll be measured. But there might be some different ways in which you're going to score them. So you'll see that there, like in SOAR, the highest scoring has a different designation than the highest scoring for outreach. And then same for the next slide, which will outline prevention. And this one, there are, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, utilizing data. So these two, if you go to the first two, they're CAAB, the 1.0.5 CAAB scoring on the previous slide. These ones are your guys's, but question 1.0.5 also for other program types is not CAAB scoring. So next slide is DCS scoring, Department of Community Services. And that is because these programs that we will be scoring actually have existing data in HMIS, and they have existing programs to where we are expecting them to meet very specific parameters for service administration. So what DCS will be doing for these programs is going in, we're going to ask them to report on their outcomes, and then we're going to go in and confirm and see actually the percentages and the goals, and then they will be awarded based on their actual previous contract performance. And you'll see there, like we have, if you're a new program, 0 points. And again, that is because we have to prioritize our existing capacity for awarding these grant funds. That being said, that does not guarantee everybody in the system that has an existing contract will be awarded, especially when we consider the reductions in funding. So just trying to make sure that of the programs we are prioritizing the ones that are most effective in the community is what this is doing. And the next slide, again, same thing. So it's just separating out. These are separate pretty much just because we look at different things for program types. So PSH, we're looking at, chronic move-ins, bed utilization, percent of chronically housed people, but rapid rehousing, we're looking at the length of stay, time from entry to housed, unsheltered entry. So there's just some nuances in what we're actually asking agencies to report on for that program type. So the questions are going to be a little different based on the program the agency is applying to. Question 6, this is CAAB scoring. Again, it's a little different based on program type. So for SOAR, you're going to describe how your outcomes are determined, and same with outreach. And then for EPRAP, you're going to specify the proposed outcomes and how they'll be measured. So you'll see some of these are just kind of skipped around based on how we had to structure the questions and point system. So just paying extra careful attention when you're going through that you're utilizing the correct scoring boxes and guidance for each question. Go to the next one. Again, transitional housing emergency shelter is going to be separate from PSH. It will ask for the proposed annual program outcomes, and then same here, and then what we're looking for. Forward. And then finally the rapid rehousing one as well. Okay. And again, I think I said this earlier, but if you weren't here or if you missed it, you will be getting an individual version of this document that does not include all of the other scoring ones too. If it's easier for you to look at a document that is just your questions based on that specific program, I'll be providing that for you guys as well, so you don't have to search through which one is specific to the one you're scoring. Question 7, describe the ways your program will work to improve the effectiveness of homeless services. And then question 8, this is scoring for us. At DCS, again, it's a very specific allocation of points. So if they're serving one population, it'll be 3 points. If they're serving 2 or more, it'll be 5 points. And these are all target populations that were identified in our HAP, in our homeless action plan. And then these ones for the other program types. Question 9, explain experience working with the proposed population. That's just where they're going to go into detail based on their answer to question 8 on what experience they have and why they're targeting that population specifically. Question 10, this is similar to the one that is existing in the CAP one as well. It talks about the disproportionality in our system and our commitment to addressing inequality. And then we have the multiple prompts here, 10 points possible, same as CAP. 2 points for each question area that is addressed, a maximum of 10 points. This question specifically asking about a trauma-informed approach. Again, that is dove into more here in our best and emerging practices. So if you want to understand more about what a trauma-informed approach entails, utilize that document. And then again, more information on based on the list of best emerging practices, identify the approach the program will utilize, and then how to score those as well. Another DCS scoring one, describe any specific eligibility requirements beyond serving those in Clark County and the required guidelines for our program, and specify why those requirements exist. And this is the only question in our RFA that will be have the ability to reduce in agencies already awarded points. And that's because we do not promote any additional requirements of households more so than what the state requires us to. So if your agency is wanting to put additional limits on service activities, we will reduce a point for that.
Can you give an example or two without an agency?
Well, we haven't had one existing, so I think I'd have to see one.
Do like time limits?
Yeah, I guess the time limit would be when we just don't allow them, so that'd be an automatic no, for that one. I don't know.
Many years ago, somebody told me that years ago, that in order to qualify for housing authority vouchers or getting on Section 8 housing, you had to have a mailing address.
Oh, okay.
And
No,
that kind of thing.
Yeah, that kind of thing. If you didn't hear it, an example could be requiring a client to have a mailing address to be able to access the program. Again, with these, I have a hard time seeing if any agencies would actually put forth an additional requirement. I think the one exception would be for YWCA maybe, if they were going to put in, we will specifically serve those who have experienced domestic violence, but for them, we kind of treat them similarly to like a Vine Force and with Janus Youth, who primarily serves youth. We wouldn't reduce their awards based on who they serve as an agency as a whole. I'm having a hard time coming up with a additional and specific, an additional specific example. If anyone else can think of one, feel free to drop it in the chat. We can share it.
It was the housing authority was requiring an address.
Yeah, that's not good, especially if you're going to service low-income or homeless individuals. How does that?
That was the dissonance, and so I'm just trying to think of examples. And if that's an example of how you're applying these subtractions, then it makes sense.
Yeah. If we do get one, I can share it with you guys though. So everyone's on the same page there. I will say we do require, on a broader sense, that individuals who are accessing our services if they're homeless have had a previous Clark County address. But that's only if they were going to come in and they should have been previously housed, I guess. You know, they're in rapid rehousing and now they fell out and they contacted Council for the Homeless. And we can confirm, you know, either they have a job here or they had a previous address. But it's not going to be true if people are literally staying on the streets, right? We see them with our own eyes and we're getting them connected. We're not going to go through and ask them to pull up some kind of documentation to confirm a pre-existing address. But for EPRAP, obviously, because they would have to be in a Clark County unit to be able to access that program type. Okay, question 14, specify how the program will integrate services with other community programs to increase the stability of households while providing assistance after program exit. So we require all of our service agencies to work or to take a collaborative approach to addressing the needs in our community. We have some safeguards in place for this. So the county requires in our contracts that agencies participate in certain work groups or certain meetings that the community puts on to make sure that they're meeting this expectation. So this is just a little bit of an explanation for how they do this and which agencies they specifically integrate with. And then this one kind of complements that one, but it's DCS scoring. Based on your answer to the question regarding service integration, indicate the number of collaborations in each category. It's really important to note that a collaboration is not just a coordination. So where coordination would be, you are an agency and you're connecting a household to another agency for their services. That is too limited. That is not what this is asking for. Agencies have in the past submitted letters of collaboration that we do not deem meet the definition of collaboration, and we will not award a point for that letter if it doesn't meet that. So, for example, Council for the Homeless, many agencies have put in a letter of collaboration from them because they receive referrals from coordinated entry. Going through coordinated entry is a requirement for our programs, and you're not doing anything more with the agency besides taking a referral or doing the mandatory HMIS reportings, work groups, whatever it is. What we're looking here is an actual continued ongoing approach, wraparound service level for how, if your agency has a gap in a certain way you're able to provide service, have you identified another agency in the community that's willing to fill that gap on an ongoing effort for your households and program? Does that make sense? All right, 16 is another DCF scoring, and this is just about leverage. So if they are utilizing additional funding sources to match cash amounts, and we do give certain points based on the percent that they're able to match, and this is just to ensure that the programs have supports, fallbacks. They can keep it going if they need to, if anything happens with the funding. Like, there's just more safeguards in place for the program to be able to run, and additional resources are available for the households that would enter these programs because of the agency's ability to capture, to manage funding amounts. Okay, and then question 17, CAAB. Describe the management plan. I think this question also shows up in the CAAB one. And then this talks about the caseloads as well. And then again, quality management and HMIS reporting. All of our agencies that engage in direct client services are required to report in HMIS. There is an exception for the YWCA, where they, because of the domestic violence status of their individuals, they don't have to put specific identifying information. I don't even know that they do put any specific identifying information in HMIS, but for billing and for us, they still have to assign their clients HMIS numbers. That way we can confirm and track their expenditures still, and be able to report on them to the community. So they do participate even though they're not tracking. And the same goes where if a client does not want to participate in HMIS, give their information, they don't have to, but the agency still has to track them with a number, even if they're not willing to participate in sharing their data. The only exception I will note is outreach. So for outreach contracts, they are not required to track every single expense that might be given to a household. So they're the only program that we would allow, say, like bulk laundry voucher distribution or bulk food item distribution without a tracking for that service. We can consider that an essential need. Essential needs don't have to be tracked. But specifically with outreach, they don't have to be tracked because you are working on rapport building. Some of the individuals that are actually staying in encampments and in literal unsheltered homelessness have significant amounts of trauma, and they can have a hard time trusting agencies specifically because of the poor past experiences with agencies with case management. You know, there's the system's not perfect, and case managers are not perfect either. So with the trauma, sometimes, a lot of times, the last thing somebody at an encampment wants to do is give their personal information to an agency for them to track and spend expenditures. So this allows us to help individuals in the community and try to build that trust. So we have flexibility with not tracking for outreach contracts. However, agencies are, if they have rapport established with some of these people that they're seeing continuously in encampments, they're encouraged to get them into HMIS as soon as they can, as soon as they build that rapport, so we can begin tracking as soon as possible. 19, how are you going to ensure program guidelines are followed, monitoring issues and findings are remedied? All agencies are required to provide us a PMP within a certain amount of time after contracts go live. PMPs are policies and procedures. Staff will review the policies and procedures to make sure they're fully in line with the grant guidelines. And that's where that really official round of technical assistance really starts to happen and program design comes to life. So if you are interested post awards in fully understanding the programs that we have funded, that is probably, I would recommend having the conversation and looking into the programs more after that point, because that will give us kind of the solidified and is allowed to do. All right, question 20, what anti-poverty or pay equity tools are we using to inform decisions regarding staff compensation? This one is specifically for the agencies to tell us how they are trying to retain and build staff capacity. And we do want to encourage, I mean, ideally in a perfect world, all of our agencies would communicate with each other because we have a similar wages across our system to promote equity. We're not quite there yet as a community, but that is the route we would like to take and the approach we would like to eventually get to. So for now, we just want to assess that they are trying to make informed decisions with how they are working to retain their staff because it's a very hard field to work in long term. So it's important that we figure out a way to maintain the staff that we have.
So I think in the other program, community action program, that's a staff answered question?
It is, and I think the scoring is just defined slightly differently based on grant requirements for the different applications. The way that this question is being scored in the other application is really defined by and more like objective point allocation.
So this is a subjective question.
It is, and that is because so the state does have they have two prioritizations, and their prioritization number one is maintaining existing capacity. Their prioritization number two, which has been reworded and pushed back on quite a bit, is staff retention and increasing wages. The problem is that with the significant loss of funding across the state, across all counties, these directly combat each other. And so we have to choose which one are we actually prioritizing. And we have chosen to prioritize services to our homeless individuals. Agencies are still, the verbiage that we have to put out to agencies still is that they need to find out a way to prioritize maintaining, retaining, increasing staff wages, especially when the rising cost of living continue to rise. But for scoring purposes, this is not something we are going to heavily negate if they aren't able to, meet that need and increase capacity, because we are not able to maintain even the system and meet that first expectation with the reduction in funds. All right. Question 21 for DCS. This is pretty much while you'll see changes in the point structure for EPRAP prevention specifically. We are awarding 5 points of this program if organization is a buy-in for organization. That means that they're substantially covered by the population that is being served. The the examples that I can think of are NIA, the Native American Youth and Families, CAAB, Cascade AIDS Project. Pequot didn't come in for funding. I think those might be our two that are designated as buy and fours. And this is a commerce requirement. Commerce has not required this across any of the other program types. Originally, we did build in points for this specifically because we would love to get a point and get some of those funds back into the communities of those most impacted disproportionately by homelessness. But at this point in time, that's not where the priority lies. The priority lies in maintaining the existing capacity. But because of the requirement, Commerce requires us to designate a certain percentage of prevention funds specifically for buy and for organizations. So that is why they are awarded points just in this program type for this answer. 22, what amounts are they applying for? If you don't want to get into the budgets and really look at the differences, you can just find that information right here. It does match. I already went through and confirmed that all the agencies submitted proposals match the amounts that they put in this box, so you are good to trust what they have here. All right, deadline. April 25th, again, I recommend starting as early as possible. I would recommend filling out your points until you hit submit, they're not final. So use your bonfire RFA section for scoring. Feel free to put your notes in there, download the Excel sheet, whatever you need to do. I also recommend, even if you're not planning on sitting down and scoring at a particular time, within the next couple weeks, get in there, start trying to find things, reach out to Abby and I as soon as possible for technical assistance because it is complicated. Bonfire can be very complicated on where to find documents, where to input things, and we want to be able to have also the time available for you guys if we need to schedule some one-on-one technical assistance to make sure you guys can score. Okay, I think that's it.
Yeah, and one thing that I'll add is that applications have not yet been assigned in Bonfire. We'll do that once they all pass the technical corrections process so that you all are able to view a complete application as you'll be scoring it. So I'll reach out and let you all know when those applications are available in Bonfire for you to review, and that should be within the next couple of weeks. All right, well, I know that was a ton of information, and yes, we do have an additional comment about volunteers from Braun. Oh, let's see, Kayla, let me know if there's a comment in the chat. Oh yeah, Bronwyn was just following up and said, volunteers, we do have interns who support with administrative tasks and supervised case management. Their time is considered volunteer hours. Thank you, Bronwyn. All right, so thank you all for being here. Thank you all for listening to this incredibly long presentation. I know it was a ton of information and I'm sure there are parts that were missed. So feel free to reach out if you have any follow-up questions. I will be sending out a follow-up email with this PowerPoint and the recording. So if you want to go back and watch anything for clarification, you're welcome to do that. I'll also include all the documents we talked about. Are there any additional follow-up questions at this time?
Nope. The building said it's time.
Yeah, the lights just went out here, so I guess we gotta go.
We still have a little bit of time here, building. Okay, are we on to the next business?
Are there any other questions on the RFA? Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Amy.
Hi, everyone.
All right, well, in that case, I will pass it back to Rob for other business.
Other business. Our next regular meeting will be March 5th, right?
That's correct, and reminder that during that meeting, we'll be having presentations. There is also a little bit of board business that we need to conduct for our organizational standards requirements, so I'll be doing a super brief presentation on the outcomes report at the beginning of that meeting, and then we'll jump into presentations. And then also a reminder that we have our 4th equity training meeting on the first Wednesday of February from 9 to 11.
Okay, it being February, that's February 5th. So we have our equity training meeting on February 5th at 9 o'clock here and online. And then March 5th at 9 o'clock is our regular meeting. Are there any comments for the good of the order? Hearing none, we'll go ahead and call for adjournment. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, everyone. And yeah, feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you.